there's, everywhere you look, there's evidence that our hormone system is regressing. It's becoming more primitive, and that affects how our brain can develop at a cellular level as well as the developmental windows. So it's really trying to understand the concept that it isn't just the blueprint, it's how the blueprint is read, and that's where the hormones come in. And we've lost a massive chunk of that in the blink of an eye, really. And there's no way something as complex as a human brain can possibly develop to its full function if those hormones were part of the developmental process. It would be taking away the silicon out of the silicon chip and then wondering why it doesn't work.
I know you also talk in the book about when man left the forests and moved, so he left this traditional diet that you're talking about of the fruit. And what else was man eating primarily in the forest? The fruit?
I think humans in particular had moved more towards fruit specialism than some of the other primates. So yes, high percentage of fruit, but other typical primate foods as well, leaves and nuts and seeds as an incidental part of the fruit diet.
And they moved and started to cultivate food, and they certainly started to rear animals and obviously start to eat meat. I think you said that at that point the human brain size stopped growing.
Well, that's one of the things that I'm particularly fascinated in. There's a lot of interest in academic circles as to why we're so intelligent, and it correlates. We have this enormously big fuel-hungry brain, and it seemed to be expanding on an accelerating curve, which is unusual in biology. However, equally interesting to me is why that suddenly stopped. Why you'd have this acceleration, then a sudden stall and a slight shrinkage. And the window for that seems to be approximately 200,000 years ago. And again, that's what I'm interested in. Is that to do with the loss of these hormones that were fueling the whole thing, and leaving the forest, not necessarily voluntarily? I mean, if we were dependent in a co-evolutionary sense on the forest chemicals, and you have, it could be climate change, for example, where the forest disappears, you're suddenly in trouble if your brain development and function depended on a mature forest ecosystem. If that's gone, then what do? Well, fortunately, we were intelligent enough to survive, and we'd find foods to eat, and we'd end up processing them in ways to make them palatable, but that wouldn't necessarily allow our brain to develop in the way it was.
So, Tony, we're in a situation now where, as we've alluded to a few minutes ago, we have finite resources on the planet. We're using them up at an incredible speed. The world population is also growing at quite a speed, and at some point there's going to be a real crisis, because we're going to use, too many people are using up too few resources, and it seems that unless we're able to realise this and do something about it on a practical level, we're in big trouble as a human race.
Yeah.
So are you saying that we have to change our diet quick so we actually start to understand this? What are you saying on a practical basis?
I take a step back from that to begin with, and quite simplistically say it's surely, bearing in mind, I mean, you say there will be a crisis. I think there's already an ongoing crisis in many areas on an industrial scale, from probably the First World War onwards, or you could maybe even go further back than that. But yes, to where the resources we have at our disposal they're diminishing rapidly and so on, and we seem to be unable to do anything about it. It must be worth considering the possibility that underpinning all that is a glitch in the equipment that makes the decisions, makes the politics, defines what is appropriate behaviour, i.e. the brain and our consciousness. If we can rule that out, then we've got some behavioural problems. If it's something that works at a structural level, and there's very good evidence that if you change the structure and the biochemistry of the brain, our behaviour alters massively and radically. Well, if that's changed in an evolutionary time frame quite recently, and there's grounds for the scope to correct that, that surely is the first place to look. Because everything else that will come out of that, if there's a problem, we'll never figure it out. It would be expecting somebody who's congenitally blind to be able to see, you know, and you can read it, you can sort of try as many approaches as you like with the symptoms. If you don't find the cause, it isn't going to work.
So we have to do something, don't we?
Well, yeah, I think, as I say, maybe I wasn't too clear, coming to a consensus that there might be a problem with the machine driving it all. I'm using, again, quite crude engineering sort of terms. If there's evidence for that, and I think there is, that's what Left in the Dark's about. It's really providing the evidence that there's a glitch in the consciousness equipment, the lens of perception, how we see ourselves. Then following on from that, if we can make an accurate diagnosis, we've got the possibility of treating it, correcting it, and more importantly, preventing it. And I suspect then a lot of the symptoms which we tend to think are practical, well, if we just did this or we just did that, well, you know, people have tried to change behaviour, then they run into the psychology of the people who make the decisions for us. I think a lot of that would start to dissipate. We'd end up with common sense rather than blatant insanity, really, which is what we seem to be suffering from almost on a species-wide level. I mean, I can't see it as any other, I can't describe it as anything else, to be quite honest.
It's quite strong words, blatant insanity.
Well, it is, but, you know, I think we're known to have killed more than 100 million of our own kind in the last century, and we're already doing quite well this century in eliminating our own kind and setting up systems so unsustainable that if they crash, you know, the kinds of problems that we've seen in the past where there were food shortages and 10,000 people died, it will be a living nightmare, really. And we can already see that. There are plenty of people who can see the symptoms. You know, that's why we're having this discussion. You can see the symptoms. So I don't think it's a huge leap to say that there's something seriously wrong if we can see there's a problem and we're not willing to address it.
I think one of the things that is difficult, and again we were discussing this before we went on air, is people. A lot of people increasingly are seeing there's a problem, but they don't see a practical solution. It's so that the solution appears to be so divorced from their lifestyle where they are.
Yeah.
They can't see a way through it. And also, the information, we're told what we shouldn't do. We're told, well, we should fly less. We should drive the car less. We should use less power at home. We're told there's too many people. There's told we're running out of oil. We're told all these things. But no one really is providing leadership and direction with what we can do without completely and utterly changing our lives. And maybe we have to do that. I don't know. But there's no one coming forward and really being brave and say, look, I feel actually I might have a solution here, or I might have the beginning of a solution. Let's try and look at this. It's like, as I say, we're given there's all these knots that we shouldn't do, and we've got to reduce CO2 emission 10% in the next 3 years and 40% by the year 2050. But we don't even know if that's good enough. So it seems to me that what you're doing here is you're giving us another window into this to look at this. But what we need is actually someone brave enough to stand up and say the truth, that we can't go on as we are. And then there has to be people that are willing to say, yes, you're right, and to some extent follow the example.